Outburst, a Todd Mills Mystery, Book 4. Author, R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher, Scribble Pub, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1998. Narrator, Eric Ost. Chapter 8. It was well after 3 hours since Todd had retreated from the waters of the Mississippi to his office, a tiny space with a glass wall and door overlooking the hum and confusion of the Channel 10 newsroom. Not at all sure how he should write the script for tonight's story, he sat there staring at the large color monitor of his computer, an eerie thought overcoming him. If I write this the way it happened, fact for fact, am I merely playing into the killer's hands? Despite the recent doubling in the Minneapolis murder rate, a cop killing still garnered a lot of attention in the metropolitan area, and the murder of Park Police Officer Mark Forrest was going to get top billing on the 5 p.m. news. Even yesterday's straight-line winds, estimated to have caused almost $10 million in shingle damage alone, weren't going to be the lead story in weather-obsessed Minnesota. Todd glanced at his watch and realized he was running out of time, for he himself was scheduled to be right there at the top of the news. All afternoon, promos had been running featuring dazzling graphics with lightning bolts, the tumultuous waters of the Mississippi, a gunshot, and a voiceover stating, WLAK's own investigative reporter, Todd Mills, witnesses the cold-blooded slaying of a Park police officer. Details at 5. It was, after all, real TV at its best, and most macabre, and the station, no fool, was playing the card to the hilt. But should Todd deliver it straight and simple, dishing out just what he'd seen, what had happened, who had fallen, or should he resist possibly being someone else's pawn? Because, after all, this whole thing was too strange, wasn't it? If he pushed things to the limit, as he was increasingly tempted, that might help things develop in some bizarre way, thereby keeping Todd at the forefront of the story. He had to be careful, however, not to overstep that distinct but very fine line separating journalism and investigation. The police, for example, could give out misinformation to lure the killer, say the number of times the gun was fired. But ethically, Todd couldn't. On the other hand, Todd didn't have much choice but to do something, anything. He'd been getting pressure over the last 6 weeks, i.e., you gotta earn your keep, pal. What with the upcoming ratings and all, to come up with some big story. Could this be it? Dropped out of a heinous storm and into his lap? Todd and Rollins had proceeded down their separate and not very compatible paths as soon as Todd's favorite WLAK photographer, Bradley, had arrived at the river after Bradley had footage of the coroner loading the body and shots of the detectives cordoning off the area and searching it. Todd and he had headed to the Stone Arch Bridge, leading the way into the structure. Todd had walked through it, all explaining to the photographer the details of the storm and the killing. Okay, the black man had said, carrying his Betacam camera and scrutinizing the area for the best angles, the best light, the most dramatic shots. We have some footage of yesterday's storm I can splice in too. That should work real well. Once they'd finished up there, Todd had returned to the station, retreating to this small glass-walled office and spending the next part of 2 hours figuring out just how the hell he was going to come at this thing. As he now sat in front of his computer, the big question, of course, was just how much he should or shouldn't say. It just kept hitting him. This was too easy. The darkest of storms, the most violent of winds, a handsome young cop, a strange meeting, a mysterious figure with a gun, and finally a gruesome end in the mightiest of American rivers. Brother, seldom did the sizzle get much better, he thought, gazing around the small chamber, which was replete with various tape players, another desk, another computer, and videotapes scattered about like used Kleenex. This should be a snap. The shock value was all right there, as obvious as glaring as a bomb in the middle of a shopping mall. So why was he so hesitant to exploit this? What was making him so uncomfortable? Once, he'd hidden the truth of himself beneath layers of half-truths. Married. No. Divorced. Yes. Dating anyone. Sometimes without realizing it, over time and out of fear, the Emmy Award-winning Todd Mills had become quite a competent liar, saying almost anything but the truth just to keep people from peeking in that closet, which in his case held as much as a walk-in, a large one. Getting to know Todd back then had been like taking on onion and peeling back one layer after another, each stratum supposedly revealing something new. At the same time, however, each piece of information had been both inconclusive and incomplete, for that was how compartmentalized he'd kept his life, and no doubt about it, Todd had worked his hardest to make sure the parts never equaled the whole, and that no one could put them all together to form a complete picture of him. In a desperate attempt to keep anyone from guessing the truth, he'd bandied about the word divorce for all it was worth, sidetracking countless employers and co-workers, not to mention friends and family, when in fact he'd been divorced more than twice as long as he'd been married, but no one ever figured that one out either. Of that he made sure. So, what was going on here now, today? How many layers were there to Mark Forrest's murder, and how difficult would it be to peel them away and expose the real truth? And was Forrest, as Todd suspected, actually gay? Obviously, his meeting with the young policeman had been a setup. Yes, the blackmail crap on the phone had been a ruse to get Todd there, just as it had been to get Mark Forrest to show up, but why? The simple, most transparent explanation, thought Todd, running his hand through his hair, was so he could witness something, and that something undoubtedly was Mark Forrest's murder. But why? Why would anyone want someone, particularly Todd Mills, a television reporter, to witness a murder? There had to be, Todd was certain, a very specific reason, definite, credible coverage. And if Todd could unveil that reason, then he'd certainly discover what this was all about, and quite possibly who had shot Forrest last night. Could it, he again wondered, scratching about for possibilities, have anything to do with Todd's own sexuality? To be sure, Todd was obsessed with the issue, but if he was chosen as the witness because he was gay, that suggested that Mark Forrest of 4895 Young Avenue South was also gay. What then? Was this some sicko's plea for help? A closet case, screaming, begging to be caught? Making a mental note of that, Todd resolved to check deeper into Mark Forrest's sex life. So far, he hadn't been able to turn up anything. The Park Police, completely independent from the Minneapolis Police, had revealed precious little. Something else to check into. Another murder? That of a gay man who'd been killed last month with a bullet in the chest? Could this, Todd wondered, be the start of a serial killer's morose career? Todd's ambition, which tended to come in oversized clumps, caused his heart to rush because, yes, he'd been called an ambulance chaser time and again, but if there was a gay serial killer in Minneapolis, he wanted to be the first one to post the alarm. Someone rapped on the glass door and Todd sat up. Nan, one of the producers for the evening news, a short woman with a short, dark hair and a wide face, shoved open the glass door. Perhaps she was just trying to be hip. Perhaps Trez, New York, but she always wore black even in steamy July. So, what's taking so long? She demanded with a forced smile that belied her frustration. What are you writing? The great American novel? Step on it, pal. Because I want to go over this with you and Bradley. Give me 20 minutes? Nope. 10. Not a second more. She quipped as she turned and walked briskly away. Stretching over and shoving the door shut, Todd shouted, Next time, close the door. He turned back to the computer, looked at the color monitor. There was just something here he didn't like, but what? Never willing to be anyone's dupe, he realized there was only one way to find out. He had to force this thing along by whatever means, and he had an idea, a rather conniving one. Yes, experience had taught him exactly how to irritate a murderer. Wanting to run the idea past Rollins, Todd reached for the phone, punched in Rollins' number, but then just as quickly slammed down the receiver. No, the media and the police can eat, drink, and sleep together, but they can't transgress that invisible boundary, the one that divides the media's freedom from the securities of the police. It just didn't make for good pillow talk, and if Todd probed Rollins for any further thoughts on the case, then Rollins would probe Todd, and no, he didn't want to tell him what he intended to do, right? He would, however, run it by both Nan and Bradley. Quickly rolling back his chair and standing up, he thought how maybe it wasn't such an asinine ideal after all. Not quite 2 hours later, Todd found himself back on the Stone Arch Bridge with a stick microphone in hand and Bradley's beta cam trained on him from the camera. A thick cable stretched down the bridge and all the way to the riverbank, where one of the station's ENG, electronic news gathering trucks, broadcast the microwave signal back to the station. From the station, the complete show would be broadcast locally and much further. Actually, for as of recently, all of WLAK's programming was fed to a Canadian company via satellite for cable distribution across that country. Pressing the earpiece into his right ear, Todd heard a godlike voice beckoning from the studio in the suburbs. "We're 2 minutes away, Todd," called Phil, the 5 p.m. line producer. "Okay." The news director's voice then chimed in, saying, "Voice check, please." Todd cleared his throat. "Good evening. This is Todd Mills, and I'm reporting live from the Stone Arch Bridge." "Got it." Todd looked over at Bradley and said, "How's my tie?" "Perfect," replied the photographer. Todd then looked down at the small monitor that was tilted up to him from between the legs of Bradley's tripod. Yes, he'd have a perfect view of the package, the segment they'd earlier taped and edited, and that would run after Todd's intro. A few seconds later, the line producer came back on. "We're 30 seconds from the top." Todd rolled his head from left to right, cracked his neck, and then stared at the monitor on the ground as the evening news began. With a small crowd gathered behind him on the bridge, Bradley peered into the camera and said, "Looking good, Todd." And then Todd saw the image of the news anchor on the monitor and heard his voice via the IFB transmission and the earpiece. Sounding as always, smooth, deep, and confident, the man said, "Good evening. This is the WLAK Evening News, and I'm Tom Rivers. Tonight's top story is the tragic news of a cop killing in downtown Minneapolis. Last night, just as severe weather was overtaking the city, Minneapolis Park Police Officer Mark Forrest was gunned down on the Stone Arch Bridge. There was only one witness to the murder, WLAK's investigative reporter, Todd Mills. We now join Todd live from the Mississippi River. Tossing it to him, Rivers simply said, "Todd." Todd stared at the lens and said, "Tom, it's been a very sad 24 hours. It started about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon when I received a call at the WLAK station in Golden Valley. The caller didn't identify himself but pleaded to meet with me, claiming that someone was blackmailing him." Todd took a deep breath, realized he was tense, and tried to lower his shoulders. "After consideration, I agreed to meet with him right here on the Stone Arch Bridge, which spans the Mississippi in downtown Minneapolis." Todd then spoke his roll cue, the predetermined line that would trigger the package, saying, "But unfortunately, all that followed was a violent storm and a violent murder." Bradley swung his camera over the water, and the piece dissolved into the taped segment with Todd's voiceover. He went through it all, meaning a man dressed in plain clothes, the storm, the gun, the missing body, Bradley had spliced in different shots of the last night's storm, the lightning and the thunder punctuating the entire story, and of course, casted a spooky, deathly tone over the whole piece. Next came the all-important shot, virtually a requirement of any television reporter's murder story, of Mark Forrest's body being carted away. Todd concluded by saying that until he found Forrest's body, he had no idea that Forrest was a cop. And not a cop on the 1,000-member Minneapolis police force, but one of the 40 officers with the equally trained Minneapolis Park Police, a totally independent and separately chartered force that was actually older than the city police and whose only duties were to protect the city's vast park system. With the audio coming through Todd's earpiece and the visual on the monitor tucked beneath Bradley's tripod, Todd paid close attention. As soon as the segment ended, he picked up. "Tom, it was quite a horrible and shocking evening, as you can well imagine," he said into the stick microphone, keeping his conclusion tight and tossing it back to Rivers. "Were you threatened as well? Did you sense any danger to yourself?" "I'm never comfortable, Tom, when a loaded gun is present." "Okay," thought Todd, trying to make himself look great. "A total of 2 shots were fired, one of them directly at me." "And what did you do?" "I dove to the side. Fortunately, the strength of the storm was just hitting, which made it very difficult for the perpetrator to take careful aim." "My word, how terrible." Out of nowhere, Nan, the evening producer, broke in, shouting into Todd's earpiece, "Love it! Love it! Your fans are going to be weeping, Todd!" "Thank God," said Tom. "You weren't injured as well." And now, Todd thought, time to set the bait. "I can say only one thing. The killer of Officer Forrest must have a distinct and definite death wish. To gun down a cop is an inordinately stupid thing to do, simply because it means that the perpetrator will always be hunted, and be hunted by professionals with guns." "Absolutely. And that, of course, implies that the perpetrator values his own life least of all. Aware that anchor Tom Rivers never made anyone but Tom Rivers look good, Todd felt it necessary to toot his own horn, saying, "To conclude, tonight the police are following several leads in the case. Given what I was able to tell them, the authorities are looking for a white male, trim and not too tall. At the time of the shooting, he was wearing a yellow rain slicker." "And what about Mark Forrest? Did he have any idea what this was about before he was shot? Did he say anything to you that indicated he was in danger?" "No, actually, he didn't. Todd, thank you very much, and all of us here at WLAK Channel 10 are relieved that you were not injured in this as well." "Thank you." Todd smiled and said, "For WLAK TV, this is investigative reporter Todd Mills, reporting live from the Mississippi River in downtown Minneapolis." Todd stood still until Bradley looked up from his camera, giving Todd a big thumbs up. Okay, hook was baited and set. Now all he had to do was wait and see if there were any bites. After all, there was nothing that made a killer more angry than a reporter who made him look like an unsophisticated fool doomed for failure. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.